Brent didn't even wait for the room to clear. We still had coffee cups on the table from the kickoff meeting. My deck was still up on the screen, and the vendor rep was halfway out the door when he said it. "Eric, you're suspended effective immediately." He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the team. Like I was a symbol he needed to burn, not a person he needed to confront. I didn't say a word, just looked back at him and waited for the silence to finish swallowing the room. The only sound after that was a Slack ping from Angela Rowe. She was in New York that week, watching it unfold through the call window. Her message just said, "Tell me this is a joke." It wasn't. My name is Eric Whitaker. I'm 43 years old, and up until that Tuesday, I was Director of Strategic Client Accounts at Halcyon Procurement Solutions. My team managed 110 meters in annual vendor transitions, including the Klein and Amherst migration, the one that just happened to blow up the same week. Brent Caldwell decided he was done pretending to play fair. I'd spent 19 years building a record clean enough to dodge every audit, but Brent. He spent 9 months failing upward, the CEO's son, fresh out of some overpriced B school with a stack of half-read playbooks and a burning need to prove he was more than a last name. So they gave him a title, Executive Director of Operations, and a target me. The logic was simple. Cut the old guy, make the team fear you, show the board you're willing to make tough decisions, and if you're lucky, the guy you cut won't have the receipts. Before I go on, if you've ever watched someone fail upward, drop a like so I know I'm not the only one keeping receipts. Brent's biggest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was forgetting I had access to contracts, to Slack threads, to the time-stamped approvals his assistant accidentally backdated, access to vendor logs that proved what he did to push the Klein transition forward prematurely, just so he could brag about an early win on the Friday call with the board. That call was in 3 days, and he thought he could suspend me before it, like I was the problem. Power isn't in the announcement, it's in the documentation, the paper trail, the access log, and he hadn't covered his. I wasn't mad, not then, not even embarrassed. I let him have his little performance. Let the new director throw his weight around like he was calling plays in some Netflix reboot of Succession. The real problem? He thought the client wouldn't notice I was missing. He thought Angela would keep quiet. He thought compliance wouldn't blink. He thought wrong. By the time Friday came around, Klein and Amherst were going to walk into the room and ask one question on record with the board watching. "Where's Eric?" And Brent would have to explain why the one person who'd managed their entire transition from pre-RFP to final QA delivery wasn't allowed in the room. Never suspend the guy who wrote the briefing deck. That client was going to walk into the room asking for me. The first thing I noticed was my calendar. It was gone. Every client meeting, every internal prep call, even my one-on-one with Angela next week wiped. It didn't say canceled, just disappeared. Quiet erasure. The kind meant to confuse you first and isolate you second. Then came the IT lockout. I tried to access the Klein vendor dashboard, locked. My Slack status showed pending compliance review. No explanation, no link, just a red tag next to my name like I was radioactive. Even my email signature had been removed. It felt surgical, like someone had followed a protocol I wasn't supposed to see. Angela called me within the hour. She skipped the pleasantries. "He actually did it." "Yeah." "Oh, I thought it was just posturing." "So did I." There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "Do I need to download anything?" I didn't tell her yes. I didn't need to. We both knew the protocol. You work in vendor strategy long enough, you learn when to save the folder, or make a copy, or quietly BCC your personal account before someone else controls the narrative. That's what Brent never understood. He thought control came from titles, from getting to speak first in meetings, from making someone like me sit down and shut up in front of our team. Control doesn't come from a badge. It comes from documentation, from knowing which approval was signed late, from remembering that the Klein SOW had a backdated appendix only 3 people ever saw. I wasn't a threat because I had authority. I was a threat because I remembered things he forgot. People started pulling back immediately. Small things. A teammate who used to send Slack emojis on every update radio silent. The product manager who called me boss as a joke stopped using my name at all. I became that situation. Brent didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He walked past me in the hallway like I wasn't there, like I'd already been off-boarded. And the scariest part, people mirrored him. No one questioned it, not publicly, because if you make eye contact with a falling man, some part of you thinks you're next. I went home early that day. Not because I gave up, but because I needed to think without the noise. The humiliation was real, but it was useful. It made me quiet. And when I get quiet, I start pulling threads. I opened my private drive, the one they didn't know about. The one I'd built for my own sanity long before any of this started. Weekly summaries, vendor call notes, Slack screenshots, audit trail exports. Nothing malicious, just complete. I didn't open any of it yet. I just made sure it was there. A time-stamped mirror of what really happened. From the moment Brent started pushing Klein's timeline to the exact day he forced a demo before QA sign-off. They thought they were moving fast. I knew they were skipping steps. And Brent, he thought the client would never know. But Klein was meticulous. Their CFO once delayed onboarding over a missing table of contents. I'd worked with them for 6 months. I knew their tolerance. And I knew what would happen when their lead walked into Friday's presentation and saw Brent standing there alone. The best part, that meeting was still on the books. He hadn't canceled it, which meant one of two things: either he thought I wouldn't show up, or he didn't know they had specifically requested I be there. I hadn't decided whether I'd walk in yet, but I knew one thing for certain. If Brent wanted to play king, he should have checked who built the castle. I didn't reach out to the client. I didn't have to. Wednesday morning, I was pouring coffee in the shared kitchen when my phone buzzed unknown number, Boston area code. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, I saw the transcription preview. Hi, Eric. This is Dana from Klein. Just confirming your presence for Friday's strategy review. Let us know if there's a time conflict. My stomach didn't drop. It leveled. Like my balance had returned, because that call told me two things. One, Klein hadn't been notified of any leadership change on our end, and two, Brent hadn't removed me from the agenda. He'd just assumed I wouldn't show. The file Brent uploaded to the shared client portal the night before I checked the metadata. It was mine. Same file name, same structure, but modified. He'd swapped out slide 9, the vendor compliance audit summary, with a branding mockup. Removed the bullet I'd flagged last week about license overextension. It was the exact issue Klein Legal had circled twice in the draft MSA. He replaced the red flag with a pretty picture. That wasn't just sloppy, it was dangerous. I downloaded both versions, his and mine, renamed them, filed them in my private drive. That's when I messaged Angela. Klein just called me directly. They still think I'm running Friday's session. Angela.row. They haven't heard me. Not a word. Angela.row. That's going to detonate. No emoji, just those 4 words. She knew. Brent had built a demo around fiction. But what stunned me more, he booked the briefing room under his name, which meant the client would walk in expecting me and find him. It would be funny if it weren't career-ending. Midday, I ran into Jordan, one of our more junior compliance analysts, in the hallway near the elevators. She hesitated when she saw me, then said quietly, "Just so you know, the Q3 licensing check isn't final." Brent told them it was. I blinked. "You're sure?" She nodded. "We're still waiting on renewal data from finance. I only logged the interim notes." He exported a screenshot of the wrong sheet. "Thanks." She looked like she wanted to say more, but just offered a small nod before walking away. That was the second crack. First was the overwritten slide. Now, a compliance gap presented as done. Brent wasn't just improvising, he was fabricating certainty. And this wasn't theater. This was a $30 million renewal client whose legal department didn't blink before escalating to federal review. By 3 p.m., I had reconstructed Brent's entire demo deck side by side with my original. There were 7 discrepancies. 1 was minor. 3 were omissions. 3 were outright lies. I labeled them calmly. Slide 4, outdated KPI source. Slide 6, vendor capacity overstatement. Slide 10, compliance gap, flagged in JIRA, unresolved. Then I did something I hadn't planned yet. I emailed myself a summary from my personal account. No confidential documents, no screenshots, just a log of what I saw. Dated. Neutral tone. It wasn't revenge, it was a receipt. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. That night, Laura noticed the shift in my face. "You're quiet," she said. I nodded. I just watched someone paint over a crack in the foundation and call it modern architecture. She didn't ask for more, just handed me our daughter's backpack to check her homework. But something in me had settled. Because people like Brent, they don't collapse. They unravel. They had 3 days until the client walked in. Brent thought he had a deck. He didn't know the version I gave them was different. I didn't say much in Wednesday's meeting. Brent was standing at the front of the conference room, pacing like he thought movement made him look confident. The screen behind him showed an outdated slide deck, last quarter's version, filled with formatting errors and metrics no one had vetted. And yet, there he was, explaining the new rollout strategy to a team that already knew it was going off the rails. Angela kept her camera off the entire call. That was the first sign. She always showed up polished even when we were sleep-deprived on international timelines. Her silence was its own kind of signal. When Brent stumbled through explaining the vendor KPI benchmark, she didn't jump in. She let him squirm. Me, I took notes. Not because I was still on payroll. I wasn't. Technically, I was suspended pending review, which meant I had no calendar access and my internal permissions had been revoked. But I still had copies of everything. The contracts, the meeting minutes, the procurement logs. I didn't delete a single document the day I was cut off. I archived them all. And on Wednesday, something else clicked. A Slack ping came in. Someone had forwarded it to my personal email. I won't say who, but the message read, "Can someone confirm who changed the Q4 delivery clause? The version Brent sent doesn't match what we signed. Time-stamped at 9:42 a.m., marked high importance." No reply. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was surprised. Brent had copied and pasted pieces of old templates before. But this was different. That clause defined liquidated damages, millions in penalty if delivery slipped. The original version had a buffer. His version didn't. It wasn't just sloppy, it was dangerous. And now he'd sent it to the client. Angela finally unmuted near the end of the meeting. Her voice was even almost bored. "I'll need updated versions of the contracts in writing by COB today, Brent. Legal's asked to recheck all outgoing correspondence." She didn't look at him when she said it, just typed something in the chat. I saw his jaw clench. He said, "Of course," with the smile of someone realizing they were no longer in control of the room. Later that afternoon, I got a message from Samir, one of our regional vendor reps, who didn't know I'd been suspended. "Hey, Eric saw a new clause in the Brent update. Just checking, is that intentional? Looks risky from our end." I didn't respond. I just stared at the phrase, "looks risky from our end." I knew what it meant. It meant vendors were starting to flag him. That meant Angela would escalate. And that meant legal would quietly begin reviewing the digital trail, who sent what, who signed what, who broke protocol. Brent still thought he was running point. But the moment his Slack went quiet that morning, I knew he was being watched. That's how it starts. First, the team stops asking for your input, then compliance starts logging timestamps. And by the time they ask for updated versions, they're not really asking. They're preserving chain of custody. I made tea that night, green same mug I'd used for 7 years. I sat at the kitchen table and flipped through a folder I wasn't supposed to have anymore. Page 14 had Brent's initials on an unsigned PDF draft. The finalized version had no initials, just his timestamp and the new clause inserted. Angela would know what that meant. So would legal. I didn't need to sound the alarm. I just needed to let the silence stretch. That's what Brent never understood. In this industry, silence isn't passive, it's radioactive. And Friday, that wasn't far away now. He thought it was still his show. He thought the client still believed in him. He thought no one remembered the clause I wrote 6 months ago that protected our delivery window. But I remembered, and I still had the original draft. I didn't need to outsmart him. I just needed to wait for the next slide to load. And Brent, he was already holding the remote. Brent had no idea what the client was about to say on Friday. But I did, because they had already called me. I didn't speak once during that Friday meeting. Didn't interrupt. Didn't correct. Didn't look at Brent more than twice. Just sat there, eyes steady on the shared screen, letting it all unfold. The moment the client's logo loaded, Brent straightened his blazer. His voice slipped into that faux confident pitch full of words, but no substance. He introduced the deck like he had written it himself. He hadn't. I had. 2 slides in, he mispronounced the client's core framework. Then again. And again. I saw Angela flinch next to me. No one said anything, not yet. Then came the clause. Slide 7, Retention Optimization Protocol. Clause 13C. He read without pause. That clause was a monster, tightly worded, buried in the appendix of a 4-year-old strategic realignment document. A clause I had written. I knew because the timestamp was still embedded in the original metadata. November 3rd, 2021. Angela and I had stayed in the conference room till past 11:30 that night, finalizing it, while Brent was probably still memorizing buzzwords for his first exec shadow rotation. The client's VP leaned in toward her mic. "Actually, Eric," she said, scanning the screen. "Was this your clause?" I felt 17 heads swivel. Even Brent froze. The VP smiled. "It just sounds like your writing style. The nested triggers, the contingency metrics, those weren't standard back then. You piloted that shift for us, didn't you?" I blinked once. "Yes, ma'am. In late 21, we integrated it after the Q4 drift analysis." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. She smiled. "Right, that's what I thought. Please walk us through your intent here." Brent tried to jump back in. "We, actually meant to position this clause as part of a broader compliance push." The VP gently raised a hand. "I'd like Eric to explain. I want to understand what the author intended." Brent sat back. I didn't move. Not out of pride, out of calculation. My voice was calm, deliberate, measured. I didn't embellish, didn't claim credit, didn't glance at Brent. Just walked them through the logic risk segmentation, predictive drift thresholds, two-layer redundancy with pre-authorized rollback. The kind of clause that could save a company 8 figures in a bad fiscal quarter. I knew that because it already had. Flashback to 2022 January. That same client, global CPG brand, faced a warehouse implosion in northern Illinois. A logistics error triggered a 40-day halt. Clause 13C kicked in, saved the entire product line from market expiry penalties. The VP had called me directly back then. "You just saved us $12.7 million. And now she remembered. Brent sat silent for the next 18 minutes. Angela passed me a note near the end of the meeting. No words, just a small drawing, a tiny crumbling throne. I almost laughed. Almost. After the client dropped off, Brent cleared his throat. "Nice job, Eric," he said. "Eyes a little too bright. Team effort, obviously. But good clarity there." Angela didn't look up. I nodded once. Appreciated. But in my mind, I wasn't thinking about Brent. I was thinking about the timestamp. The version of the clause Brent had included in the deck had been pulled from my archived draft, not the updated compliance-approved one. That wasn't a presentation mistake. That was a policy breach. He'd skipped version control, and I could prove it. You ever sat in silence knowing someone just handed you their own rope? That was Friday, and I still hadn't said a word to HR. Not yet. Midway through the day, I checked the metadata again. He'd downloaded the wrong file at 9:16 p.m. on Wednesday, less than 24 hours after I was suspended. The version he used bypassed the security approval line, which meant he didn't just use my work, he violated access protocol to do it, and the audit trail was clean. It was the kind of policy infraction that wouldn't trigger alarms on its own, but stitched together with the right timing, the right pattern of actions, the right context. It was the first domino, and he didn't even know it had fallen. Sometimes the best revenge is doing nothing while the system takes note for you. I didn't push back that day. I didn't gloat. I didn't tell Brent what I knew. I just let his mouth run and let the compliance logs start their quiet whisper. Hey, have you ever watched someone try to steal your work only to see them fail in real time? It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels still, like the moment before thunder hits. Because part of you remembers how many nights you gave to make it, and part of you knows it's not over yet. Next week, the formal quarterly review would begin. Brent had just put his name on the wrong file, and I had the receipts. Ever had someone use your work to bury you, only to trip over it themselves? I'd really like to hear if you've been there. Drop a comment, this one's personal. Brent didn't realize the clause he presented wasn't approved. He didn't know I'd already tagged the audit team. He didn't even see the trap he'd just activated. But on Monday morning, someone else would. Angela stopped by my desk the next morning and didn't say a word at first, just stood there with a paper coffee cup and eyes that scanned my face for too long. I nodded toward the empty chair. Brent's not in yet. She sat slowly. I read the metadata. That was all she had to say. We'd flagged the document Brent sent to legal, his so-called performance memo about me. But the version he forwarded wasn't created by him. It was compiled off an earlier report I'd written, and stripped of context. He'd deleted paragraphs, added bullet points, and exported it as if it were his own original submission. Angela took out her laptop. It gets worse. The access trail shows he edited it on a machine tied to his old consulting account. I just stared at her. We both know what that means, she added. Using unapproved external systems to process internal documentation during an active compliance inquiry, that wasn't just an HR infraction. It was grounds for internal audit escalation, especially with client-facing deliverables involved. But I didn't say that out loud. I just folded the sticky note Megan had left in my bag that morning, the one with the drawing of the two of us under an umbrella. I tucked it into my wallet, quiet reminders of who I was doing this for. Angela leaned back. "You still want to play it quiet?" "I do." "Then you'll need backup?" She didn't mean help. She meant verifiable cover witnesses, logs, timestamps, version histories. The sort of quiet architecture that gets built behind the scenes while everyone else plays theater in meetings. We moved to encrypted messages. Slack wasn't safe anymore, not with Brent's access level and his father's security clearance. I started logging everything I touched: client files, policy changes, flagged phrases, the exact times I accessed each system. A memory crept up out of nowhere, one I hadn't thought about in years. 5 years ago, when I was onboarding with Global East, an older exec took me aside after a team lunch. "You're smart," she said. "Too smart to think competence will protect you." I had laughed back then. I thought she was being dramatic. I thought fairness had weight. But I'd watched her disappear 2 months later, quietly, professionally, almost surgically. Her calendar vanished overnight. I never forgot how calm she looked as she packed her laptop. Angela interrupted my thoughts. "There's a conference room block open Friday morning. Big client review." I looked up. "You mean?" She nodded. "The board's favorite pharma account. Guess who they asked to lead?" "Brent." "No, you." That's when it shifted. Not the power, just the weather. I didn't feel victorious. I felt cold. Because Brent was going to find out at the same time the rest of them did. And I wasn't going to stop it. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted Megan to understand one day that you don't get to rewrite the truth and keep the spotlight. Especially not when someone's watching. Angela stood. "You're not going to gloat, are you?" I smiled faintly. "No." "You sure?" I paused. "But I'm not going to step aside either." And just like that, the next move was set in motion. Because the moment Brent saw that meeting invite hit his calendar, his father's legacy client under my name, he'd panic. And panic makes arrogant men sloppy. Very sloppy. Let's just say Friday was going to be clarifying. Would you have stayed quiet this long? Or would you have pulled the trigger already? I didn't say a word during Thursday's leadership sync. Brent ran it like he always did, tight smile, over-rehearsed charm, and no real content. But I watched the shift, subtle but there. Angela's eyes didn't drift to him anymore. They kept darting toward me. I wasn't back in the room officially, but the client asking for me by name had changed the current, and Brent felt it, so he struck first. That afternoon, IT flagged a change to my system permissions. My internal access logs, which had been reinstated quietly for the Friday demo, suddenly showed pending admin override. The timestamp didn't match any approved request path. Someone had tried to lock me out again, but this time sloppily. Angela sent me a screenshot, no subject line, just, "You saw this, right?" I responded with a single line, "Let it ride, just keep everything." Because by now I wasn't reacting, I was documenting. The protocol trail was clean. The client account folder had been assigned to me since Q2 under the pre-transition plan. I still had cache-level access via the compliance continuity clause buried in onboarding updates, section 11.3.2, continuity overrides on critical demos unless client revokes in writing. Nobody reads the 11s. Brent hadn't expected me to. But here's the thing: I wrote that clause 2 years ago when we lost a project lead mid-launch. It was buried deep, just one of those policies that only matters when someone tries to play dirty, like Brent was now. I could have flagged it. Could have made it public, but instead, I let it sit, because some things are more powerful when discovered late. That night I opened the folder. My wife Laura once joked I'd never use Plan B, executable escalation. It wasn't dramatic, just PDFs, threaded emails, and time-stamped voice memos, but everything was in there, every access denial, every Slack thread Angela archived before Brent deleted them. Every policy clause I'd written for situations exactly like this. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was protection, and still there was something about it that felt like defeat. Quiet. Hollow. I pulled the sticky note Megan had left on my desk back in March, faded now curled at the corners. "Go crush it, Daddy." She had no idea what was coming. No idea I was building a digital wall just to protect a reputation that might not be salvageable. For a second I just sat there. Let the silence stretch. I thought of Richard Caldwell's voice months earlier, during our last one-on-one. Don't ever assume the building cares who built the foundation. You protect yourself quietly. He'd been right, brutally so. By morning, Brent had pushed a modified memo to HR, a quiet nudge suggesting I'd been informally overstepping boundaries despite prior redirection. It was vague, too vague. But I didn't respond. Angela handled it. She routed HR back to the audit logs, sent them 3 hyperlinks with metadata tracking, all above board, no emotion. And that was the moment it all turned. Because Brent didn't realize it yet, but the very systems he tried to weaponize had already been recalibrated. And Friday, that wasn't a meeting, that was detonation. Let them think I was walking in to explain the slides. The real message wasn't in the deck, it was in the paper trail he never saw coming. Friday came. The moment the conference room door shut behind the client team, the air shifted. Brent stood confidently at the head of the table, arms crossed, grinning like a kid who had just stolen the spotlight. The senior client, Gideon Mars, VP of Strategy for Covalt Biomed, wasn't smiling. Neither were his analysts. I sat 2 chairs down, intentionally quiet. I'd already done my part earlier. That morning I had CC'd our in-house legal on a clarification request tied to Brent's pre-meeting material. A single line referencing clause 14.6 of our client engagement policy, representation of team capabilities must reflect accurate delegation and historical track record. In other words, don't lie about who actually did the work. Gideon cleared his throat. Before we dive into projections, Eric, I need to ask. This model Brent presented, how closely were you involved? I looked at Brent. He blinked. Too slow. I turned to Gideon. That model was based on a forecasting matrix I developed 2 quarters ago. I handed it off to the ops team once we transitioned support. Brent led the formatting. Silence. Brent laughed a little too loud. I think there's some confusion around scope. Eric's early input was helpful, but Gideon raised his hand, cutting him off. Was this flagged in the documentation? Brent didn't answer. I didn't need him to. My Slack message from 3 weeks ago, time-stamped and forwarded to our internal audit team, already included the file history. Gideon tapped the screen. Because if what I'm seeing here was presented as your original structure, and it isn't, we have a problem. Brent shifted in his chair. This feels like we're getting sidetracked. Angela, seated beside me, slid her iPad forward. We prepared a full handoff timeline, including contributor history. For transparency. The client's analyst nodded, flipping through the files. Gideon didn't look at Brent again. Eric, are you free next Wednesday? I want your insight in our next cycle meeting. Direct input. I kept my tone even, happy to join. Brent's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was defending myself. I felt still. I let the silence breathe. The meeting continued, but Brent was just a shadow now. I watched him scribble into his notepad faster, messier, as if he could write his way back into control. He couldn't. At one point, I glanced down at my notebook. Megan's yellow sticky note was still tucked inside, half curling at the edges. You already know the truth, Dad. Just remind them. I had. That night, I sat in my car long after the parking lot emptied. 1 week ago, I was the guy they tried to sideline. Today, the 30-minute client asked for me by name. But this wasn't the finish line, not yet. Because Brent, he still had access. And the audit trail I'd been building, it had one last breadcrumb left to drop. Next week, Brent would try to retaliate. But what he didn't know, the next move wouldn't come from me. It would come from his own system, and the one clause I never stopped tracking. By Monday morning, the office felt different. Not quieter, just hollow. No more frantic emails from Brent at 2 a.m. No sudden urgent meetings about presentations that didn't exist. And no more forced town halls where he pretended to be what his father never believed he could be. He wasn't fired, not yet. But something had shifted. I didn't need to ask. I could see it in the calendar invites that stopped appearing, in the way Angela's tone changed when she said, "Let's just use the original compliance version," in the way Richard Caldwell's assistant scheduled a one-on-one with me and described it casually as a routine check-in. It wasn't routine. We both knew that. I had watched Richard play this game for over a decade. He didn't storm. He didn't shout. When he was done with someone, he simply started talking to someone else. So I walked into that meeting prepared, not to defend myself, but to offer clarity. Richard didn't even sit at his desk. He stood near the window, arms folded, his voice low. I've reviewed some inconsistencies from last quarter. There were sign-offs that didn't make sense. I nodded. I kept the receipts. He didn't flinch. I slid over the printed clause from our international client contract, the one Brent had tried to modify post-signature without board authorization. A fatal mistake. Angela backed up the original thread I said, including the internal signal messages. Richard took the paper, read it in silence. Then finally, I need you to sit tight for a few days. Let this play out. And just like that, I knew Brent's immunity was gone. That week, things unraveled faster than even I expected. Compliance sent out a soft query to a handful of client teams about document versioning practices. Legal requested a fresh copy of the vendor onboarding SOP, which Brent had gutted last spring. Angela was asked to temporarily oversee one of Brent's verticals while we transition. None of it made headlines. No press releases, just shifting shadows and quiet reassignment. And still, I played it cool. I answered what I was asked, nothing more. The only time I let my guard down was late Thursday when I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and found Megan's sticky note still taped to the inside. Don't let mean people make you small. I hadn't seen it since the week I got suspended. Now I smiled, because the power wasn't in the note. It was in the silence, in knowing I didn't have to scream to be heard. And Brent, he started showing up late, then not at all. And by Friday, someone else was leading the weekly pipeline meeting. No explanation, just a quiet replacement. The Slack rumor mill stayed quiet, but only because everyone already knew. Angela stopped by my office as the day wound down. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a manila envelope. Signal transcript, she said, including the version edits and timestamps. I didn't even have to open it. I already knew what was inside. It's enough, I said. She paused. Do you still want to send it to the board? I looked at the envelope, then back at her. No, not yet, because I wasn't done watching him fall. And what came next, he'd never see coming. By Thursday morning, I'd confirmed the inevitable. Alyssa's assistant forwarded the revised client-side meeting schedule. Friday at 9 a.m., Richard Caldwell and Brent were expected to brief the client's new procurement head. They were walking into that room blind. I knew it, and I had the files to prove it. The audit documentation Brent had tried to bury. The version he forced Angela and me to revise after back-channeling that vendor deal through his buddy's LLC. I still had the originals. Time-stamped, archived, mirrored to an external legal review folder I set up during the compliance rewrite last year. And now, that folder wasn't just a failsafe. It was a weapon. I didn't send it anonymously. I didn't need to. I forwarded the documents directly to the client's legal liaison, someone I'd worked with before, and who'd once called me the cleanest operator in vendor risk management. No message, just the attachments, the audit trail metadata, and a subject line that said, "You'll want to review this before Friday." Then I sat back and waited, not out of smugness, out of exhaustion. Because I'd spent the last 4 months being surgically erased by a nepotistic heir who couldn't survive one procurement clause without hiding behind a last name. I didn't need to grandstand. They'd expose themselves. By Thursday night, the whispers started. Angela pinged me on Signal 3 emergency meetings. Alyssa is not happy. You didn't hear it from me. I stared at that message for a while, not smiling, not even angry, just quiet. I remembered a time, maybe 2 years ago, when Brent sat across from me in that same boardroom and asked how I managed multi-region rollouts without missing compliance windows. I told him it wasn't about catching mistakes. It was about designing a system that made corruption impossible. Apparently, he wasn't listening. That Friday morning, I dressed like I used to when I briefed clients directly tailored navy jacket, polished shoes, cufflinks I hadn't touched in 6 months. Not because I expected to walk into the room, but because I needed to remember who I was before they tried to turn me into a footnote. At 9:06 a.m., I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Eric Whitaker? This is Joel from Langan & Shore. We just met with Richard and his team. Do you have 10 minutes? Langan & Shore, the $30 million client, the one Brent tried to brief. Without me. Angela had warned me. They're particular. They don't tolerate fuzziness." I tapped back one word available. 10 minutes later, I was on a call, just me, Joel, and his COO. No Brent, no Richard, just questions. Sharp ones. Why were there 2 versions of the vendor file? Why were cost avoidance flags removed, post-review? Why were the procurement clauses redlined without timestamp logs? I answered every question calmly. Factually, no spin, no bitterness, just what I knew and how I knew it. When Joel paused, I thought maybe it was done. But then came the real question. "Eric, would you be open to meeting with our team in person next week? We'd prefer to work with someone we can trust. I didn't nod. I didn't gloat. I just closed my eyes and said, yes, I'd like that. But what I didn't say not yet was that I wasn't the only one listening to that call. Angela heard it too. And her message after, that's what stuck with me. That wasn't a callback. That was a rerouting. And Brent had no idea what was about to hit him Monday morning. By Friday morning, Brent was nowhere to be seen. Angela didn't say anything. Neither did I. But the look we shared as I stepped into the conference room said everything he knew. Someone had warned him. Probably his father, maybe legal. But it didn't matter, because the damage was done. The client's email had already been circulated to the board, word for word. We will not move forward without Eric Whitaker leading the transition team. If he's unavailable, we're prepared to consider other firms. That email wasn't a suggestion. It was a $30 million threat. Richard Caldwell stayed silent, but the board's faces told the story. Directors who had previously dismissed me now leaned in during the meeting. I noticed the sudden politeness, the copied emails, the return of my full system access quietly with no apology. They thought this would fix things. It didn't. I walked out of that meeting and sat alone in my car, engine off, AC blowing stale air. I stared out at the line of visitors badge scanning into the lobby and thought about everything Brent had gambled and lost. A part of me still felt nothing, just a cold, measured quiet that I hadn't known I was capable of. He tried to erase me. He failed. And now he couldn't even show his face at the one meeting that could have saved him. What came next wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about finishing what he started, only this time with the right paper trail. And yes, I kept every single page. I didn't feel anything when Brent stepped down. No triumph, no thrill. Just the same silence that had followed me for months. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't even a company-wide memo. Just a quiet update in the leadership portal. Brent Caldwell is no longer serving in an executive capacity. We thank him for his contributions. But I had seen the full report. I knew what was buried in the compliance logs, the same ones he thought no one would read past page 3. Failure to disclose conflict of interest, mishandling of privileged data, hostile conduct toward internal staff, and the most damning line of all, flagged for escalation in accordance with subsection 7.14 due to repeated violations and retaliatory intent. Richard Caldwell didn't defend him. He didn't call me. He didn't even look for a scapegoat this time. He just let him fall. And maybe that was the real punishment, not the loss of title or board privileges, but the quiet, the absence of anyone willing to clean up after him again. Angela and I never talked about what we did in plain terms. The documentation trail was airtight. Our messages self-deleted. Our conversations coded. We were professionals. We never said the word revenge. But every move we made had meaning. Every escalation, every wait and see. There was a plan, and now it was done. I stayed 3 more weeks, enough to document the client transition, enough to train the junior team. Then I put in my notice and walked out without a word. No farewell lunch, no big speech. Just my key card dropped in the bin and one last nod to the security guard who'd seen me survive things they wouldn't put in training manuals. At home, I logged in to see my daughter's homework assignment she'd written about people who solve things quietly without yelling. She listed firefighters, librarians, and her dad. I didn't cry, but I read that page twice. The fallout wasn't televised. No one clapped. But somewhere in that office, buried under policy updates and project briefings, was a trail of decisions that told the full story. And I was finally done living in fear of who controlled the narrative. If you've ever been forced to play it quiet just to survive, I hope you know there's power in the slow, careful plan. You're not alone. Drop a comment if you've been there. Someone will understand.